You are listening to the Level Up Your Gaming podcast, episode 24, Table Talk and What to Consider. Today we talk about table talk between your players. We go over what to admit into game and when to look the other way. We get pretty sidetracked with Jared, and Jared deep dives into what the essence of developing and running a really good game is. So this is actually a pretty worthwhile episode. If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you like the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, or tell a friend. Now sit back and enjoy the episode.
Welcome into the Level Up Your Gaming podcast. My name is Aaron, and across from me in his home, joining me via Zoom, he'll use anything you say at the table against you in the court of game, Jared.
Guilty. Guilty on all costs.
How are you doing today, Jared?
I'm doing pretty well. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good.
Everyone staying safe?
Staying safe, staying zooming, talking by a long distance. We always do our little pre-game talk. We kind of catch up before we get on the podcast here.
Yeah, today was a long one. We talked for an hour before we even started the podcast.
It's been a while since I've talked to you. So.
Yeah, it's things popped up last week. For our listeners, I'm sure you guys all noticed that we did not have a podcast up last week. I had some real world stuff pop up, and that stuff had to get taken care of, and we were unable to record. But we're here. We're back this week, and we're happy to be back. And
back and kicking ass.
Back and kicking ass. So
Cheetos.
Cheetos. The delicious snack. Who doesn't love Cheetos? Communists. That's who doesn't love Cheetos. I'm telling you, that's the truth.
But this week, Jared, we're gonna go ahead and dive into something that we've touched on a little bit before, but we're gonna start talking about table talk and what to consider at the table. I think we briefly hit on this during the metagaming episode.
We did.
But I think that this is kind of a broader topic and something we should dive a little deeper into.
Okay, so let's establish some talking rules, ladies and gentlemen, some talking points, if you would. One, as a GM, you are the referee, okay? GM responsibility is not easy. Sometimes you got to make calls that players don't particularly want, and you have to mitigate their emotions. It happens. This is part of the job. Two, I forget number two. I'm terrible with lists. Why do you even try lists?
Well, you should write them down. That's typically how lists work. Is you write them down, and then you remember all the points to your list. You bring up a really good point, which is that your job as the GM is to be the ref, and just like in the NFL or any other professional sports league, people sometimes hate the ref because the call doesn't always go your way. Okay,
yep, the call does not always go your way.
This is particularly true when you've got players talking during a scene and always kind of, chatting amongst themselves, looking around. And, depending on where they're talking in your game is really the point at which you have to, decide whether or not you're going to admit this into court for evidence or not. And that's kind of your job as the GM. So you can be really, really lenient and say, until somebody says, I am saying X, I'm not actually saying it in the game. Or you can be really, really strict, which is everything said around the table is in game.
And so there's really 2 points on really when it's difficult to discern. So you have two players that are literally strategizing at the table. While there is let me set a scene for you. There is, the players are negotiating with some high up count, right? And you have one player A, who's doing most of the talking. Then you have player B, C, and D. B, C, and D are all strategizing, okay? Because your player A is doing all this talking. And I have run into this where player B looks to player C and should be like, we should just kill him. We should just kill the Duke and steal all this money. Like, why are we working for a living? This comes into such the conundrum, okay? Because Oh my God. It's technically metagaming. You are technically planning things right in front of the guy. So I find there's two ways to really make the best judgment calls. Here goes my list again.
Here we go. See if we get to point
One. Yeah, let's see if we get to point. So I'm just going to say them both. Ready? One, will it increase the fun of the game? Two, will it further the story? Bam, got both points out. Hooah!
Done.
Got it. Got it. So now in review, in more detailed, will it increase the fun of the game? At one point, you know, you're always amping up for fun. Your goal is always fun. Will a player looking to another player going, well, we should just murder the Duke? If the Duke's consequences are going to be screaming, guards! And the guards are going to come out and just murder all your players, did that increase your fun? Did everyone enjoy that little jaunty tune? Was that a great, rousing fight to which we died heroically? No, we died going, we should kill the Duke. You died because somebody said something stupid. Now, unfortunately, you might go, well, in video games, and this is one point that I hate, and oof. People go, in video games, you make a stupid mistake, you die. And yes, absolutely, you're correct. You were talking to two gamers.
Yes.
Okay? I play video games as my form of stress relief. You cannot compare role-playing to video games. Why? Because a video game character, when you die, you are reset to the nearest waypoint. Unless you're playing, what's that one game, Dark Souls, where I think you can play that if you die, you have to go all the way back to the beginning?
No, even in Dark Souls, you end up back at a waypoint. It is a very punishing game. You're probably thinking of something like hardcore Diablo, where if you die, you're dead.
Yeah, hardcore Diablo. Or, and don't think of it like, well, there are other games out there that if you die, you're dead. Yeah, but you're always brought back. So, for example, like some modes of FS or first-person shooters, they will have you die until the next match. The next match is in 5 minutes. It's a inconvenient break where you can go use the bathroom and get yourself a drink. Role-playing isn't that. Role-playing is entirely different, where if a character dies or if a whole party dies, there needs to be another story constructed. The time that your players have spent making characters is over. So imagine that if you're in a video game and you've been, you're one of those people that when they give you the opportunity to make the face, you spend like 3 hours working on the eyebrows. Oh, those eyebrows aren't right. Oh, those eyebrows aren't right. Oh, eye color is just totally off for those eyebrows. Let's start over. Imagine doing that, but 100 times worse. And you lose your character permanently. And because here's the thing, and I'm not going off topic because I don't want anyone to get off topic. It's just every consequence. Does it increase the fun? Your players are going to have to go through this. And I will tell you this, players, your good players are ones that sit around and they go, okay, I want to make this character. I want to build them out. Family, friends, connections, other stories that my storyteller can take advantage of. These characters can take hours to create. They can take days. Sometimes you'll come up with an idea for your character 2 weeks after creation. You'll bring it to your storyteller and your storyteller can use it. Awesome. And then you have players that just have a limited amount of ideas for players or for characters. They've got, maybe 3 or 4 and they balance between the 3 or 4 ideas. But when you murk the whole fucking team, there went PG-18. When you murk the whole fucking team. There has to be character gen, story, and yada yada. And if you are a storyteller who's now sitting back and go, yeah, my guys do that like every freaking week, I'm gonna ask you, or I'm gonna guide you. Right now, you need to level up your gaming, because trust me, there's hidden resentment. Right now, your players, trust me, are talking, and they're talking like, dude, Jared really stinks at storytelling. Can someone else storytell? Trust me, they're plotting against you in the real world. And you need
don't
to
kill the characters every week. I think that's a really good point. Is that your consequence for talking and resulting in a player wipe, definitely
doesn't increase the fun.
Doesn't increase the fun. It does have bigger ramifications. The only thing I would say, and again, we're a little off topic here, but the only thing I will say to that point is, if you are going to player wipe a team, the only time that I think that is even acceptable to compare the two things to a video game is if you're doing like a one shot and you pre-gen characters.
Yeah.
Okay. That's easy to drop out new characters or whatnot. But for the most part, you're probably going to tell a long campaign, and this is like, if the players die, your campaign is dead. Okay, like sure you could resurrect people, but that means that somebody's got to get out of there. So if people are saying we should kill them.
And a character resurrection is damn near a retcon. It's damn near a retcon. Like, oh, you guys were resurrected from the dead 2 evenings later. It's
lazy storytelling. In my opinion, it's lazy storytelling, because essentially what you're giving is that player the ability to come back as the same character that they never wanted to lose in the first place because of a bad rule call.
And the other thing is that in that situation, the lesson is lost. The lesson of don't say stupid shit in front of powerful people who have a small army at their disposal. Gone. Because I'll just raise from the dead 2 nights later.
Exactly.
So, does it increase the fun? Now, if it will bring about a fight that your players maybe can win, maybe your players have been jonesing for. Has it been a night or two since they've gotten a good solid combat in? Let it roll. Let the dice roll. Go ahead, make that call in the moment, but take into account the second point. Does it increase your story? So, excuse me. Allergies. Ladies and gentlemen, when you have allergies and Corona is about, trust me, you're treated like a leper, especially at work.
Everyone's a leper.
I cough, I sneeze, and suddenly they're like, Jared, stay in your office. I'm like, what's my office going to do? Send me home. Please send me home. So I can snuggle the wife because my wife's still working from home. So, but when you have the Duke's team enter and the Duke's team gets murked, your players beat the ever living, the ever living snot out of them, and they hold the Duke. And they're like, give me the code to the vault. And he gives you the code to the vault, and your characters make out like millions, like bandits. What do your players do with that newfound money? Anticipate this. Say to yourself for just that second, if I gave my players $3 million because they managed to beat all the Duke's guards, how does that increase my story? Does it get me to another point in the story that I've wanted to explore? What if, because all I'm saying is that your players having a ton of money. See, I almost pulled out the S word there, but I'm reeling it in. Because I'm hoping there are younger players that are listening to us and taking our years of experience and leveling up their gaming at a young age. Because trust me, if you are, 14, 15, and you're with your party and you're listening to us, you are getting an education of years ahead of your time. It took us
how not to do stuff. I mean,
here's how not to. Or how to do or take particular tools. So you're getting 20 years of gaming advice in a short, compact 30 minutes. But so if you're a game that your characters have been set in poverty the entire game, let's take Serenity for a great example of, man, they keep having to fix the ship with busted parts, and they have to take every job and scrounge for every penny. What happens when they get a big payday? Do they get a new engine? Do they get a faster engine so they can take better jobs? Does it level up? Do you move to the next level of your game where the heroes are becoming a little bit more renowned? Why? Because they took out this local Duke who was an evil guy anyway, and he's getting some renown, and they got a better ship, so they're getting hired for bigger jobs. Now we want you to take the train job because your ship can actually catch up to the train. A la Serenity, the train job episode. Can anyone tell I love Serenity? Keep flying. Okay. Except I'm not a brown coat. I'm sorry. But it's because I'm a storyteller. I've lived my life being the bad guy. I'm not the hero of my own story. I never have. That's a weird ponderance right there. Take that one to heart. 14 and 15.
Deep meditations with GM Jared.
Deep meditations with GM. Are we the villain of our own story? So it could bring up, like, don't get hesitant. Well, I shouldn't say don't be hesitant. Hesitate. Think, will it increase my story? And these are fractions of a second decisions you're going to make. And sometimes you will make the wrong one. So sometimes you're gonna hand them $4 million and they're gonna be like, oh well, I'm buying a planet. Huh? Or they scream out, we're retiring to a desert island. Or not a desert island, but an island. We're retiring to die in the desert. And your players take that football and they run into their own end zone, and it's not good. So in that you have to you can take it to the next level. They actually do the goal, but always bring in that real world perspective. And this is one of my personal favorites. So for a while I was helping out other storytellers on Reddit. What I did was I brought some perspectives because, as hopefully for new listeners, I studied history in college, and I taught history for 8 years. History will always show you when there's an influx of cash to one group, something gets offset. And it'll also show you that when a leader is removed from power, that doesn't happen in a vacuum. So does that, without the Duke and his royal guard, does lawlessness take over? The royal guard isn't there to enforce the laws. Are taxes no longer being brought in? So the roads go to crap. Okay, some of this is very advanced thinking. I apologize. But it holds true. It adds to the story. If the Duke's guards are defeated, your players steal all the money from the Duke, and then there can be a story where the players come back and realize that, hey, ripping off nobles maybe isn't the greatest thing that could happen, because although nobles, yes, historically they are the villains. We paint them in nice villainous pictures in Cinderella and all the stories that we grow up watching, hearing, and reading. They did bring governance and a state of law and a state of security. You couldn't just murk a farmer because somebody's got to farm that land for the nobles. So the noble's going to send out his troops and he's going to murk you to show the rest of the farmers that, hey, if anybody messes with you, I'll take care of them because I need your crops to make money. So, small history lesson there for you. The more you know. Ring! Can you tell I've missed podcasting? I'm talking a mile a minute.
You're very energetic this episode.
I am. I've definitely missed doing this. So in the table talk, in that moment, you're going to make those two decisions. You're going to make, is the consequences going to increase the fun of my game? Are those consequences going to increase my story? If the answer to both of these is no, you need to let it go. If the answer to one of these is yes, you're going to have a moment of conflict. You need to make the best decision for your player and your games. And then if the answer to both of these is absolutely, then yes, take that table talk in. So when they're like, we should kill the Duke, you look at them and go, the Duke looks at you and goes, guards! And they're going to go, what's going on? I was like, you guys looked at each other while you're in front of the Duke saying, yeah, we should just kill the Duke. Oh, we were just talking to each other. Yeah, that stinks. You weren't in front of the Duke. Because if they're like, well, we weren't, it's like, guys, then were you metagaming or are the guards getting called? Which one? Were you cheating or are the guards getting called? Now, third thing, I see. But I didn't say 3 things. I said 2 points.
You said 2 points. But now you're making up a third one, so let's hear it.
And because I said there's a third one, now, of course, I forget it.
Oh. All right. Well, forgetful Jared. There's a couple things that are always true. Jared will always forget it.
If he numbers it, he's going to forget it. So, really you need to, so I guess the third one would be consistent. You need to be consistent in your rules call. You can't pick and choose. That's why these two decisions are key in their point, and they're made in a flash moment, and it's a huge responsibility to take on, but it's a joyous one when it works out. But you need to be consistent. Typically, what I do in my games, if I got two players who are conniving at the table, if you will, I'm going to fire a shot across their bow. That's what I do. Jared fires shots across bows. I have always typically asked, are you doing that? Or did you say that? And then my players look at me and they're like, no. I have actually once had a player look at another player and be like, no, I totally said it. Shoot him. This was, I do believe.
I remember this.
We, Nick, in one of his infamous meetings with another mafia boss, he had come to make peace, and they had gotten settled quiet with no guards, and he had another player there. I'm not sure if it was you or Brian.
It was Brian. I wasn't there. I only heard the story.
And Brian was Nick looked at Brian and was like, shoot him. We can precisely what happened to the Duke. We're gonna rob him and take over his mafia because we just killed the head of the dragon. And I was like, what? And Brian also looked at Nick and went, what? And Nick was like, shoot him. I was like, are you saying this? Nick's like, yes, shoot him. And sure shit, Brian shot him, and large combat ensued, and it increased the fun of the game, and it did increase the story. So you need to always look at that. That third is to be consistent. I fire the shot across the bow. Are you saying that? Are you doing that? Because my players like to hypothesize, and they make funny hypotheses that bring out joy in me. But if I make the decision to just exercise my right and be like, nope, you said that, and I don't make clear, consistent cuts, then I'm cheating my players, because they're going to stop hypothesizing out loud. And I'm sorry, I find my players' hypotheses absolutely hilarious. Now, I've also instituted a rule. Well, I haven't. The community has. It's amazing, because we do have a community rule. It's called the consigliere moment. Or if you're American, consigliere, or if you're Italian, consigliere, where I have players that will look at each other or look to the other players and be like, I need a consigliere moment. At this point,
it's like you're having an internal dialogue. It's like it's a moment where basically.
Oh no! See, he got energetic, and now the system.
I got too energetic, and I froze the system.
Still waiting for him to come back. If you can hear me, I'm hoping you can.
I can hear you.
We lost you there for a moment.
Okay, I see what happened there. But no, the consigliere moment is a moment of, basically it's a moment of internal dialogue with yourself, but your player is like the good and the bad devil on your shoulder, essentially. Okay, it's a moment where they can say something, and you can interject it into your conversation or wherever you are to ask a question, be it that they might not be there. So one of the best examples of this is that during our investigations, you'll be asking questions and the player isn't asking the right question, okay? And none of us are there. Oftentimes we'll blurt out, what about blah, blah, blah? And it's like, we had discussions about it in game, so it's not unreasonable to think this person would then ask the question.
Or in my personal favorite situation, because our characters are all trained investigators, they know the questions to ask. You know, let's take Brian, for example. Brian is a mathematician. He is not a trained police interrogator.
Yes.
But his character is. You know, and that's where the storyteller, the knowledge of the group, can supplant. And here's the thing, storytellers, listeners, I've gotten involved in consigliere moments as a storyteller.
It's hard not to when you're the storyteller, but it's hard to be involved in them because you know them, you know the answers.
Exactly. So, you know, I typically take this as an underhanded way of guiding my players, because every time that I speak, I am thinking of my game. Trust me. They think I'm helping them. No, I'm pushing them in the direction I want them to go. So hypothetically, if Aaron ever wanted to screw up my games, he now knows whatever Jared says in the consigliere moment, do the opposite if he wants to screw me over. But
I still
fortunately, he's a
won't
good player.
because
I know.
I'm too enamored in it. Typically, when you say things, I then start hypothesizing in different directions, and then I just end up tying myself in knots with different hypotheses. But to Jared's points that he's made already on the table talk, I think that you have always been very consistent as a GM. And one of some of the best moments are made when we are having a discussion. We've lost the thread kind of, and we don't know what to ask next, and we're sort of talking amongst each other, and you enact that the person we are talking to is listening to us and like very confused about what we're talking about, or like because we might start talking about like state secrets basically of like werewolves and vampires, and the person's like what and then and then you have to talk your way out of that situation, or you have to be like, don't ever talk about that again, threaten the guy. You might have to do some very fun things that make the game enjoyable. The other one that I think needs to be touched on is if you are having a discussion with someone and someone blurts out something like "you son of a bitch" or like something so crass and brazen for the moment that like you would never really say that, like you murdered her, like just flat out accusal of something. Okay. and that's always a moment where like it's kind of a 50-50 proposition with you, Jared, whether or not you admit that into court or not.
It is.
Because
It is.
it's always kind of a crapshoot because it's a funny thing to say in the moment, and Jared could take it and be like, "You're totally fucked. Like you just talked down the king." Like,
Yep. And in the end, but I will always take those 2 points into consideration. Is it going to increase my game's fun? And will it increase my story? And that's what it comes down to. Those are most of the decisions I make, even when it comes down to rules calls. Will it increase my fun? Will it increase the story? That's the I guess it's funny in a podcast that Aaron and I have discussed is like, okay, this is a good topic. It's a solid one. It's not one that's like The Gathering. The Gathering is one of the ones that I consider it a pillar of what we've talked about. If you're going to listen to an episode, listen to The Gathering. But this one, I think I finally touched upon the core of storytelling. Philosophizing with Jared the GM. Doesn't increase the fun of my group. Doesn't increase my story in a positive direction. This is the foundation of any storyteller referee decision. It just happens a lot in table talk because it does. Because there's some times where it's too funny. You want to make sure that your players are running the emotional gambit with not every game session, but every game. Is there a cry time? Is there a laugh time? Is there an anger time? Is there a kind of blah time? Typically known as downtime. Are you running that emotional gambit? And table talk is your moment for comic gold. Because I'm not a funny guy. I don't find myself to be very funny. If our listeners think that I'm hilarious, it's just know that like I think like when I make a joke, like the room there's crickets every time I make a joke. Like my wife tells me I'm funny, but my mom also says I'm special. So see, like
well, I've known you for a long time.
But I don't think I'm funny.
I have context to these people. You're a good storyteller, okay? Not just a good GM. You're a good storyteller. You could spin a yarn, Jared. I'll give you that.
A good yarn. But my players, I think, are hilarious. I think Aaron's funny as shit. I think Brian is funny as shit. I think Ken is funny as shit. So, like, when they say funny things, I'm like, okay, comedic gold time. Let's increase the fun of the game with this comedic gold. It's just knowing what time to do that in. So I typically find it great for interjecting a little comedy, a little levity, because you need it. It can't rain every day. I think we talked about that in another game where we talked about theme, or another podcast where we discussed theme. and that it can't rain every day. It can't always be sad. It can't always be scary. It can't always be angry. It's got to be some points where there's a good chuckle, a good laugh. And table talk is a perfect time because your players are de-stressing. Typically it's a funny moment where I can be like, the NPC is looking at you wide-eyed as you talk about vampires and how much blood they need to drink to survive, and they're just like, what? And the players are like,
vampires exist?
Don't you say any words about this. And it brings comic gold. Can I put it in my pocket for later? Absolutely. But I need to make the announcement at that time. So the NPC has to show reaction to the words that are being said at that time. Because you can't just put it in your pocket later and be like 3 sessions later, like, you guys were talking about this in front of them. And be like, what? We were talking amongst ourselves. Like, you didn't react. You're telling me you didn't react at all? You got to give them some indicator that guy's listening and hearing what they say. Because I'm sorry, no human being is ever going to sit there with 3 grown men talking about how much vampire blood a vampire needs to ingest without going, I beg your pardon? Trust me, because all my coworkers know that I'm big into D&D. Fortunately, I have a boss whose son is totally into it. So my boss and I will he'll ask me how my game is going. And I will be like, it's going great and blah, blah, blah. And I've got to build a city this weekend. And you'll be like, oh, so are you leaving early on Friday? Be like, probably. Mind you, this is one of the tops of my organization. Like, he's third in command. I mean, but his son loves role playing, so he knows about it. And but if another coworker walks in while I'm like, well, 3 orcs approached my players last week. This is not actually what I say. I'm like, my players are currently investigating. Dang it, what she's. Okay, the Wendigo. All right. And another coworker walks in and is like, a what? I will explain that. I will bring context to them while I'm talking about this game that I'm playing in the weekend. But if your characters are like, oh, we're talking about something we dealt with last week, trust me, you're going to see a visible reaction. So you can't just put it in your pocket and use it later. If there's a visible reaction, like this person's like, oh my God, you're talking about vampires. And the players are like, shut your mouth. You never talk about this or we'll murder you. What happens 3 weeks later when this person, there's some random article in the Inquirer about vampires exist. If your players are playing the prince of the city or high-ranking officials, now there's a lot of clutter. Did it increase your story? Does it increase the fun? So if they're playing princes, that's freaking awesome because the prince now has to scramble to get this story embedded, find out who did it, punish them, even if that includes the actual prince. Like, oh my God, it was my sheriff. How do I cover this up so my sheriff doesn't look like an idiot? So when you get into that situation, it doesn't increase the fun. If your players are minor members of a vampire city, and vampires have a rule in Vampire the Masquerade that humans can't know that they exist. Pretty basic rule. I think we can all understand why. A la True Blood, I don't think would be the reaction to vampires coming out of the coffin. Or I think there'd be mass freaking panic and deployments of an immediate military force to handle this situation. Wouldn't be like, oh, we invented True Blood. They won't have to kill you. No. No. I wouldn't care how much. I'd be out there with my stake and my cross going, the power of Christ compels you. But I do love True Blood as it is an excellent satire on the introduction of homosexuality into America and yada yada. It's a wonderful satire on it. But philosophizing with GM, what is with me today?
Musings with GM Jared. Jesus, we should do a whole podcast on it.
Right? Jared and his random trains of thought. This is why my students loved me. It was because I would get off on these random trains of thought and be like, True Blood, have you guys ever watched that show? And they'd be like, really? Are we talking about this? I'd be like, this is social studies, guys. We got to talk about the social community and how this is satire. They'd be like, all right, well, we'll talk to the English teacher about satire. I'd be like, no, we're talking about it right here. Sit your butt down. So either way, back to table talk. If your players can can handle that situation before it gets to, say, the prince of the city, who's going to be like, I'm going to chop off your heads. If they're the first ones to grab that story and they can go off onto a small side story to prevent that from getting published or whatever. Maybe they have a contact inside the National Enquirer who calls them and lets them know before it gets printed that they can go and head that off in the pass, and it's a nice little 2 to 3 session story that they're going to engage in. Go for it. If it's just going to end up with your characters getting their heads lopped off, that doesn't sound very fun to me. It doesn't, especially if you're doing it 3 weeks after the fact. Unless your lesson is to them, murder anyone that you talk about vampires in front of them. Unless that's your lesson.
That's a very harsh lesson to teach at the end of a story. And you have, again, everything that you do to teach a lesson with some consequences in game. Everything that you do to teach a lesson, make sure that the lesson is clear what you're trying to teach them. Okay, don't have them do this thing, ages later and completely forget about it.
3 sessions ago, you talked about vampires in front of a human. Now I'm going to murder you for it. Now it just seems like you're trying to close off the game. Trust me, your players are probably all sitting around going, okay, he must have really hated that game because he just shut it down for no freaking reason. Trust me, they didn't get the lesson. The lesson just did a flyby.
Seriously.
They're just thinking about their players getting or their characters getting murked. That's all they're thinking.
Getting unfairly murked. But I think you really did hit on the really good premise of what we're trying to get across in this game. And I think, after 24 podcasts, this is the 24th, we finally kind of hit on it, and this is probably going to be the theme as we go by week to week. Does it increase your fun? Does it increase your game?
Does it? Ask yourself those 2 questions. If you hit on both, on a no or a yes, you got a very clear path. If it's hazy, it is going to be up to your discretion of the storyteller, and really that's where you need to ask yourself, what do I intend to do? And how do I take a break? How do I mull this over? My advice to you would be to err on the side of caution. Games are fragile. Games can be ruined with one bad scene that will take you weeks to recover your players' trust. It can take you weeks to rebuild the story you were attempting to lay the foundations for. One bad scene, one bad decision can take weeks to repair. One good decision, one great decision can keep your game moving for another month or 2. So always take those 2 factors into consideration when thinking about table talk. I tend to think of it as kind of gold. Don't forget about your warning shots. Warning shots are great. There's nothing wrong with a good old-fashioned warning shot across the bow. I think that summarizes it, really.
I think that's very eloquent. I got nothing else to say on the subject. I'm pretty sure
I don't.
And you've been a dandy for this episode, Jared. Let me just say
that. Like sitting around like Buddha. Butterfly flaps its wings in a story, and there's rain instead of sunshine. Does the rabbit actually care? I guess they're good times, and I don't know why this particular podcast started out in this, where we could sit around and kind of philosophize about the true nature of what is the core of storytelling. Let it be this podcast. And I guess this is something that I encourage all of our listeners to do, is have these conversations with your friends about the nature of role-playing in itself, because trust me, that in itself will level up your gaming. Because you'll fall into these little pitfalls and you'll find out things about your players. Like they'll tell you, Jared, I freaking hate your scary games. They'll be open and honest with you when they know there's an open, honest conversation going on and no one's going to get morally affronted. You might find out like one of your players hates your scary games. He hates them to his very core, makes him want to leave the freaking game. And then you got to start strategizing. How can I make? And then you ask him the open, honest question: what about them makes you hate them? Well, I hate being scared. I find that boring. I'm never scared. Whatever. You have a great open and honest conversation. And I'm following into another philosophical track.
But we'll get more musings from GM Jared another week. But if you want to reach out to us, maybe give your own musings or your take on Jared's musings, you can get us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com. Otherwise, subscribe, review, tell a friend, tell your gaming group, tell everyone who wants to listen to 2 people mutter on about musings about gamings and whatnot. And for Jared, I'm Aaron. We'll talk to you next week, guys.
Have a great week, everyone.